folks, thanks for listening today. I'm excited to have Sean Scott on the phone. Sean is one of the owners at Subculture Coffee down in, well, two locations now, one in West Palm Beach, Florida, which is where they got started, and then now Delray Beach. So, Sean, thanks so much for taking the time today, and appreciate you doing this.
Absolutely, man. It's a pleasure.
So just tell that, I mean, I've read a little bit about your story, but and why you got started, which I thought was really cool, but kind of talk a little bit about, what was the genesis of starting Subculture Coffee?
Well, I've been a coffee lover for a while, and I'd never worked in a coffee shop, but I played a lot of music. And when you travel and you play music, you spend a lot of your downtime in coffee shops. So I'd always dreamed of kind of doing that one day when I decided it was time to settle down. And so about a little over 6 years ago, I did a space share with my brother, just to kind of limit startup costs. He had an art gallery, so I figured it would work well if we shared space. And so I kind of just opened up a little coffee stand in there, just me and my wife, a bare bones approach just outside of DC, and that's kind of where it all started. But it was, and that was my first coffee job. I'd never worked in coffee before I opened a shop, so I don't know if that was the smartest thing, but it's worked out. It's worked out so far. So.
Well, okay. So I mean, that takes a lot of. I love coffee. I love coffee quite a bit. But starting a coffee shop seems. There's just so much that goes into that. That's a big leap, and especially now down where y'all are. Am I right that there's not around sort of the southern tip of Florida? You don't find a whole lot of independent coffee shops, or was that the case when you started, or is it still the case?
Yeah, no, that's definitely the case. When before we were Subculture, we kind of rebranded a little over a year ago to Subculture, but when I started Habitat down here, we were the only independent coffee shop in West Palm Beach. And West Palm Beach is, it's a small city, so South Florida was definitely, and is still, I call it a wasteland of good coffee.
Wasteland of good coffee.
Yeah, there's just nothing. There's nothing down here. But I figured that'd be it's a good opportunity for me, because I think everyone can appreciate good coffee. They just need to be exposed to it. So I think in cities where it's developed, it would actually be harder to get into the market and make a living doing it. Whereas down here, I figured the product would sell itself, and it'd be easy to kind of get my foot in the door, especially with the minimal cost. Because it was just me and my wife, the overhead was really low, and we could run it super efficient. But that was the case. It gained popularity pretty quickly. We've just gone from there. So now there's definitely more. In the past 2 years alone, there's been quite a few other coffee shops and roasters pop up. Panther Coffee in Miami started about the same time I did down here, about 3 years ago, and now they're pretty big, well-known. Joel's, well-known in specialty coffee. So we're creeping onto the scene finally, but I just figured it'd be a good place to expose South Florida to good coffee. So
yeah, man, and you guys are. Am I right that you wrote some notes that you guys are what's called a micro roaster? So you roast your own beans?
Yeah, we roast all our own stuff. That was a new thing for me. I had worked with Counterculture, which I'm sure you know who they are, when I first opened the coffee shop 6 years ago, and I was a customer of theirs for about 4 years. But yeah, we switched over to roasting our own when we rebranded as Subculture, just because I teamed up with a local, another guy here, and we thought it'd be a good idea to just give that a go. We both really wanted to be, have a story from start to finish. It's kind of popular now to say direct trade relationships, but if you're looking at a business, it's really nice to be able to know, farm to cup, what's going on with your product. And so that's really a large part of why we started roasting, was just that we could have pretty good control and personal relationships with the people in our supply chain. So.
Now, how so farm to cup? Like, how do you, if you're roasting, that must mean that where do you source your beans, and how do you go about finding high quality good beans to?
Well, I mean, it's difficult. Yeah, that's definitely the hardest part. Execution of coffee is, I would say, it's the easiest part, but finding beans, because there's so many. I mean, coffee is the second most traded commodity in the world. It's huge. There's just an endless stream of sources to get it from, but the grading and quality control and shipping and all that stuff in third world countries isn't that rigorous. It's getting better, but for us, we started with Cafe Imports. He's a super reputable importer for specialty coffee, just to start. But we have a farm in Honduras that we're talking to directly right now, 2 farms in Brazil that we're talking to. Just got a call while I was driving from the farmer, which is pretty cool, to have that accessibility now in the 21st century, just to be able to literally talk to the guy in Brazil who's sending you coffee. So, and they came through Mod Bar, which is the espresso system that we're going to be using, that we are using in Delray. So it's one of those things. It's like any business. Your sourcing just takes time. It takes talking to people, getting referrals. That's where we went off of. We didn't go into a blind. We asked the guys at Crema in Nashville, who they use for sourcing, because they're the ones that kind of trained us how to roast. So for us, it was just all referral, and then it's just finding the bean that you like, for the style that you want, and just whittling it down and kind of refining it year after year. And it's a long-term approach. If you're going to roast, it's not a quick process. And anyone that thinks it is doesn't know, because it's a true craft. It's kind of like, I call it like an old world craft, because there's not any quick way to do it. Coffee's slow. Crops are slow. The shipping's slow. The aging and all that stuff. It's just a slow industry that requires kind of quick execution. So it's quick at the retail end, but everything from farm to cup is actually a really slow process that requires patience and a really good palate and kind of just trust, old school trust, and that what the farmer said he's sending you is what it is, and it's this year's crop, not last year's crop, and it's this grade, not that grade. So a long-winded answer, but there's a lot to it. So it's been interesting.
Man, it's a great answer, and I really, there's so many aspects of that are just fascinating to me. My mind is just going in a million directions right now, because I thought of 20 questions when you went through that. It's so cool. So, well, let me ask you this. Okay, so you were talking to, directly to farms. Would it be safe to assume, help me on this, like certain years Brazil has good coffee because doesn't climate play a role in this? For sure. Isn't that like a huge variable that's like unpredictable that could completely change, the quality of the beans year over year from, one place to the next?
Yeah, well, absolutely. That's the thing, and that's kind of the sad. I'd say sad, but there's a lot of risk for the farmer, because there's many variables out of their control. Brazil got crushed this past year because they had disease run through a lot of their crops, and I want to say a third of their normal production was cut, which is massive because Brazil is the number one producer of coffee. So that throws the coffee market kind of into a frenzy, because obviously it's supply and demand. That's where relationships and a lot of people do origin trips. It takes, on our end too, you really have to get to know just fundamental kind of agriculture. And a lot of people, going back to counterculture, Stumptown, or those guys, they have active people year round that help the farmers kind of produce the best crops, institute better growing practices, just either whether it be technology or just knowledge that we have in the States that they might not have access to down there. And sometimes they're not going to have a good crop, and a lot of times smaller guys like us don't have multi-year contracts for that very reason, because we can't to undertake the risk of having a bad crop arrive, and then we're stuck with it. But bigger roasters can do that. National roasters can do that because they have more of the control. But you're completely right. I mean, there's many variables out of our control. So, we personally don't do a multi-year contract because of that. But again, just like the other guys, because this is a learning process, we'll help mitigate as many of those factors as possible, so that we can have kind of consistent crops from the same farmer each year without saying, this year we're in, this year we're out, because then it's just difficult for them because they have bills to pay too, and families and communities that they're trying to support. So we're going to do our best on our end, but it is risky.
Yeah, there's a relationship there. There's a little bit of karma, I would imagine. It's just an important part of that, and helping each other and having like a long view. So, which is really cool, man. It's like one of the great things about coffee, I think, is that you do have that piece of it, at least, the folks that are really serious about it, like you guys are, and they take the craft very seriously. As you mentioned, it really is like an old world craft, which old world, not only is it the craft of the roasting and brewing, but the relationships that, would have been in place, thousands of years ago when people were trading coffee like that then. So there's a little bit of that still around, which is awesome, which is great for people that really love good coffee. I'd be one of them.
Right.
So then you've got this cycle of, finding and sourcing and, receiving good or ordering good beans, quality beans, and you get those, and then now, what does that mean that you're a micro roaster? Is that based on a volume that you roast, or how does that work?
Yeah. I mean, that's one of those words. I don't know when you go from micro to macro. I don't know. Where exactly that cuts off. I think for us, I think once you hit, I can't give you a definitive answer to that, but like in my opinion, there's definitely a tipping of scales. You'll see it a lot with some roasters. I see them when they do mail order, and all of a sudden they'll give you the option to grind the coffee before it ships. I'm like, oh, they're a macro roaster now, because they'll pre-grind coffee. That's because that's just a big no-no in specialty coffee. You just don't pre-grind coffee because it ages so quickly. And so for me, it's almost, but that correlates to massive volume too, because they just have so many. The demand is so high that they kind of just do whatever. But a decision's made. A lot of them get outside investment. Millions of dollars. There's quite a few micro roasters that have now scaled up dramatically in the past years, especially on the West Coast, where they've had huge investments. And when you get that, you have to have a return. So your whole business model changes from, I feel like, from like small batch to, all of a sudden you're doing 20-pound batches, and you go to 150-pound, 300-pound roasts, which is a big difference. It's just like anything. I don't know if you can maintain the same level of care and kind of specificity on your batches when you start having hundreds of pounds in the roaster, compared to tens. So I think that's subjective. There's not a definitive answer, but there's just some parameters that I see that kind of correlate to micro and macro. So that's about it.
Yeah. Well, then, so I mean, you roast like what, 3 or 4 days or a week, or how often are you roasting? I guess does it just depend on how much business?
Yeah, about 4. And we have roasters in each shop. So a lot of guys don't do that. They'll have like a main place to roast, and then they'll ship to their shop. But we kind of like the added ambiance it brings, and just the tactile experience for customers. So we roast about 4 days a week, a minimum of 3. And just depending on, flow and what's going on. Because, you have to roast essentially 3 days out, so you have to forecast busyness too, because you can't roast today and brew today. so to speak. So it does require seeing trends and, you know, kind of knowing your seasons and all that kind of stuff. But, yeah, about 3 or 4 days.
So when you say it's a craft, I mean, talk a little bit about that and, like, you know, how much of this is just a skill that is learned over time through trial and error, through practice? How much of it's based on, you know, I mean, is there like better technology and equipment these days that helps make that craft easier to learn, or just help me out with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, coffee is definitely trial and error. I think there's nice parameters that you can find out there that kind of give you a baseline, and then it just, again, you know, it's finding out what style of espresso you want, what brew methods you prefer, and then you just taste and taste and taste and tweak and taste, and then, you know, it's just like over time you just refine your style through trial and error. But there are baselines. In roasting, it's been difficult because I feel like a lot of roasters keep their trade secrets to themselves. Like, they don't talk about it that much. But you know, I'm not part of the Roasters Guild yet, so I haven't been to any of their retreats. But if you try going online and finding anything about roasting, it'll be all over the map. I mean, it's a lot of it's about home roasting, but there's nothing out there for, you know, small guys, small roasters like me, small commercial roasters. So it's just trial and error, man, because each bean, each crop comes in, and you just have to find out how that bean works best, and how it doesn't work. And I think that's where, like, a really good staff, a trained staff, comes into play huge, because an Ethiopian might be great through a Bonmac and slow pour, but might taste really rough through a French press. But that's where they have to, you know, we kind of stress going through and making sure that we know how each coffee type tastes best, and kind of guiding people with what, you know, which way they may want it, and which way they won't. You know, even some coffees cool really horribly. So I'll be like, you want to drink this coffee fast because it's delicious hot. But when it gets a little cooler, the acids turn on you, and it can, you know, it's not that great. So yeah, trial and error, man. But that's what people aren't used to either. You know, because we're used to big box, you know, retailers, we're used to consistency, and so the craft. A lot of people think it's sexy, but with craft, stuff changes weekly, and that's the fun part about it. You know, that's the alive part about it. That's where, you know, people, you can keep them on their toes, but that's where the struggle is. You find that people almost like homogenization, and they get a little frustrated when they're like, why can't I just have that same coffee month after month? I'm like, because it's seasonal, and we only have 10 bags of it, you know, or, you know, whatever. And so that's been a challenge. You know, people like that for a little bit, but they want their, you know, consistency year-round. So, but that all comes with us educating them through our day in and day out of trial and error. So that's the vast majority of it, man. There's not a kind of a lock and load approach. It's just going about it every day and being surprised.
Well, that's really cool. And so you mentioned, you know, educating people. I was curious about that. Like, if you are in a community where there are not a lot of independent coffee shops, or have not been, and maybe, you know, and you guys are kind of the tip of the spear with that in a lot of ways, are there like pros and cons, meaning that there's pros that you have an advantage that, you know, you're filling a void, but then are there also some cons where everybody's kind of used to, you know, their Starbucks or whatever big chains that just, you know, like, there's just, you have to kind of educate your market about maybe the differences and what the difference in quality is and so forth? Like, is that? Yeah,
well, you know, I think, you know, where I differ from a lot of the third wave shops, you know, there's kind of a knee-jerk reaction, in my opinion, to Starbucks and those guys, where it's like no syrups are allowed in third wave shops, and only one size, everything's allowed, and, you know, it's like a very purist approach. Where me down here, I'm not like that, you know. So again, we suggest sizes, and our proportions are all, you know, correct, but like we have a regular and a large. We have 4 syrups on hand, we do mochas, we have seasonal drinks. And that's me kind of conceding to the fact where I want people, I can still serve great coffee, but if they want hazelnut in it, cool. And I'm cool with it. I'm not gonna make them feel bad about it. And especially in our environment, I think it's necessary to have those where, over time, it's really cool to watch people start pulling the extras out of their coffee when they're like, oh, this is great. Once their palate gets refined, you'll see a lot of people do that. They'll switch from whatever their go-to was at Starbucks to just, straight cappuccino here. There's nothing else. I don't need anything. I don't need to put my cinnamon and my whip on it and all that kind of stuff because it's just good as it is. So that's where it's like I'm much more subtle in my approach, and I think it's necessary to know your market because if you go in with like a self-righteous attitude, I think you may not be around for too long, or you'll just you'll alienate a demographic or a large part of the demographic that you don't necessarily need to. But I am a relationship guy. I'm much more about having a community space than I am like maintaining the integrity of a cup of coffee. Like I just want people to gather. I want to serve great coffee, but I want to be a community spot first and foremost. Because that's just kind of our ethos down here. So, different strokes, different folks.
Sure. Well, you know what your approach is, and you guys are sticking with it, and that's cool that you have like a good balance of high quality product, but also not kind of over the top in your face purists. This is an art, not a business kind of thing, because it is a business. And on that note, so you've now you opened your second location. So talk a little bit about going from 1 to 2, because that's a big change, I would think.
Yeah, it is a big change. We have 13 employees at our West Palm shop, and we have about 16, 17 at the Delray. Different vibe. So, it's, for me, on the management side, it's just difficult because you're just managing people a lot. When you have 30 people, I'm sure you know this. That's almost more of a challenge than the logistics of the actual business. Because once coffee is coffee, and margins are. I kind of already know what the margins should be and what the numbers should be every day. So opening a second one isn't that difficult business-wise. It's just it can be more of my time and energy is spent on the people side, which can detract from focus on, other things in the business. So I think 2 is going to be manageable if, because my business partner is really amped about this. If we do more than 2, we'll definitely have to develop leadership that can take more of that off my plate so I can maintain kind of the feel, the vibe, and, the quality of coffee. So that'll be hard. I'm not quite there because we're kind of new into the second one. So, talk to me in a year. And, I'll probably have a better answer for you, but those are the current challenges.
Yeah, man, that's cool. Now, so you may have mentioned this, but I missed this. You roasted both locations?
Yeah.
Okay. So then, and is that something I guess it's you, and well, like you said, you really don't know yet. Would you think you would continue to do that as you continue to grow to have that at all your locations, or does it eventually become a thing where you have to consolidate your roasting?
Yeah, I think we'll always have a roaster, but the roaster could just be smaller and, kind of do specialty or special bean just for that shop, or a certain, espresso blend that we just roast at that shop. But I think if we do grow, there's going to come a point where we'll centralize all of the roasting just for, quality control purposes. So I think, we have Dietrich IR12s, which are fairly decent sized roasters. So I don't think we'll want or need those at other locations if we open them. But again, I'm trying not to look too far in the future about that, because I think if you focus on, or for me, if I focus on the growth outside of these first two shops, it just gets me off of making what we have solid. Because I mean, we're a fairly new business. You know, again, my partner's been in the restaurant business for 30 years down here, so he's really established. But he's never done coffee, so it's different than the other ones. So we're going to take a shop at a time, but you know, we'll see. I don't think every shop will supply its own coffee though for the long run. I don't foresee that. So,
do you now? Is it? I mean, do you have what types of food items do you guys have? I mean, or is it? Are you do you need to do you sell additional pastries or things like that to help generate more profit? Or
yeah, we do. We do all in house. You know, food right now. It's your typical, you know, pastries and muffins, and we do our cold pressed juicing, which is pretty big down here, and I guess everywhere. So that's a large portion, not a large portion, but a substantial portion of sales. And we have prepackaged lunches and stuff brought in every day, but we're going to be switching over to doing it ourselves this year. So we'll be doing all the, you know, just salads and sandwiches, just all cold stuff, nothing hot. But yeah, that stuff's important for sure. Grab and go items to kind of pad the sales.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Now, how do you? What are some of the things you guys do to? I mean, are you doing a lot of advertising and things like that, or are you just kind of growing, you know, word of mouth organically, or what have y'all done to try to get people to come in?
We do Google AdWords Express has worked really well for us.
Okay.
You know, that's been, you know, because a lot of people just, because we're a tourist destination too, a lot of people just pop up on their phone, punch in coffee West Palm Beach or
coffee West Palm,
you know, organic coffee or whatever, and so on Google, and you know, you can just really specify your demographic and your area and all that kind of stuff and your keywords. So that's really worked really well for us. We don't do a lot of standard print advertising, and you know, we do some sponsorships locally, but pretty much all of it is it's just, you know, search engine stuff that we focus on, and then just some local sponsorships.
Yeah, I mean, are a lot of your customers, you have, I mean, you are a tourist area, a lot of folks are traveling there, but do you have a good solid group of regular customers that is continuing to grow as well, or is it a good mix of
for sure.
tourism? Yeah.
I mean, Delray is a little different because it's such a tourist heavy spot, but West Palm, there's City Hall, there's a library, there's a lot of daily people that we have. You know, we're a little seasonal, but we're not affected too much by seasonality. You know, sales will differ about 15%, 15-20%, which may seem like a lot, but when you expect that, it's not, you know, it's not a big deal. You can plan for it. But yeah, I would say, you know, 75% of our people are regulars. You know, so pretty heavy on the regulars up here. Down in Delray, you know, I'd say it would be about 60-40 since it's a little bit more tourist driven.
Well, now, how do you? One thing I'm always curious about, Sean, is how do you know when you found the right location? You know, I mean, I'm sure there's you probably explore a lot of different ones, and then how do you know when to pull the trigger on a location?
Well, I think locations for coffee, one of the main things for people, it's got to be on their way to wherever they're going. And it has to have walk-by traffic. I think one of the main issues that a lot of coffee shops have are they find a really cool spot, and it's just a block or two out of the way, but that block or two, can kill you because it can mean 500 people aren't walking past you each day. So your rent might be $500 less a month, but the impact is dramatically more than that. So for me, even with kind of our brand getting known down here, we're on the main strip in downtown West Palm. We're on the main strip in Delray, and that's essential. Just because I still think it has to be on people's way. It has to have really easy, available parking. It can't be a destination. I think too many people think their place is going to be the place that everybody will go to. It's a destination. I think that's a bad move. So we're pretty deliberate on having, again, available parking and pretty heavy walk-by traffic, not just drive-by. People tend to just keep on driving. They're just they're focused and they don't really want to pull over. So being in a downtown area, that's why we kind of pick these two. If people are coming here and they're staying here, they're not driving through here. And so that's what I think is important, at least for what we're doing.
Nice. For anybody that's considering, there's a lot of folks that probably want to do what you did, but have a lot of reservations. I love how you just kind of just jumped into it and went after it. Did you? What about the? What are the investments? Obviously you've got a lease, which is a big commitment or whatever, and your build out, and then you've got a significant amount of equipment. But building a coffee shop or starting a coffee shop certainly isn't maybe quite the same as if you're going after a big full service restaurant or whatever. What are some of the things you learned from when starting that maybe things you hadn't thought of before you got started, or you kind of look back and said, "No, I didn't think of that before we got going."
I think a lot of people, me included, you underestimate just the liquid cash you should have accessible when you start. You think, all right, so I have the bill out paid for and everything. You tend to spend everything before you open, and you're like, well, we'll make money once we're open. And I think that's a bad move. If I had to do it all over again, I would have more money in the bank, just because you're gonna have to do a lot of promo. You're gonna waste a lot of products. You aren't gonna make as much money as you thought you were. Things might happen slower. Things break. Usually opening gets delayed a lot longer than you thought. There's way more permits that you have to pay for. There's way more licenses that are $150 here, $250 there. I think that's the thing is a lot of people just focus on paying for the build out, but they don't really pad their account. And I understand because a lot of people don't have access to the capital to cover all that, but I think it's really important. That can make or break it, especially in the first year.
But maybe that's a good, kind of rule of thumb, if you will, is that people don't, but maybe you shouldn't start just yet, right? Until you do. In other words, that's because that could be there's a lot of places that don't make it that first 6 months, partially for that reason. Maybe if they waited and they had more reserve cash, they could get through that challenging period and get, but what would you then, okay, so Sean, let's say you went and you went back and you were talking to, Sean Scott from several years ago before you started this. How much, capital would you say you need? How many months worth of, operations capital would you need to have stashed away to feel good about it? 6 months or a year? Or
Yeah. I would say 6 months is good. For us. I would also advise anyone that is going to do it. If your personal finances are a mess, then you probably shouldn't go into business. So, a really good litmus test that when I'm talking to younger people or whoever asks, I'm just like, so how are your personal finances? Not that I want specifics, but if you've had a hard time managing your personal finances, and if you can't figure out ways how to save money and do this and do that with your personal, then business might not be the place for you, because you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to know, literally, we price out per cup of coffee, lids, cups, coffee, milk, sugar. So I know exactly like where everything's going. And the same thing applies in your personal life. If you don't know where everything's going, then there's going to be a lot of holes in your boat, and you're going to be losing a lot of money. So I think for me, that's what I did. I was always very conscious of that because my dad gave me my own checking account when I was 12, and I had to start buying my own clothes and all that kind of stuff at a very young age. So accounting has always been something that I've had to focus on and be aware of. So it's almost natural. But I found that for a lot of people, like my wife, it wasn't like that at all. And so we just made a decision to, we moved in with my brother before we opened the first coffee shop, just to save, we just shared rent with him. We had one car instead of two cars, so we sold a car. We just minimized our lifestyle before we opened the shop too. So that's another thing I suggest is don't expect to maintain your same lifestyle or minimize it on purpose so you require the least amount of money when you're starting up and then, expand it if you can afford to as you grow. So I think those things are, I almost put more emphasis on your personal life before you open than I do on your vision of the business because there's a definite correlation there, I think, in my opinion, to how you run both and the success you'll have and the ability that you'll have to navigate rough waters and make it through, and survive. So.
Sean, okay, so this is really, really, really good advice. I mean, if you're listening to this, and that's true, that's really true, in nearly any business. I mean, if you really do need to have a firm handle on your personal finances if you're going to get into any kind of business, and particularly a restaurant where you need to have that discipline and in the skill set to manage that properly and be able to predict and plan. And like you said, I mean, you're costing out your cups and lids and everything else, and a lot of people are, that lesson gets learned the hard way. The other thing that you said, I think that's extremely, extremely important is the idea that things take longer than you think. Things will cost more than you think. No matter how diligently you think you are planning and how conservative you think you are, it will still take longer and cost more, won't it? Isn't that just how it works?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, for sure. I think that's without a doubt. There's in my 6 years of doing this, there's never been a time where I'm like, oh, that was faster.
Right. It never happens that way. It's always the opposite. That cost a lot less than I thought. So the idea of I really think you're onto something with which, like a lot of people, they don't have like reserve cash sitting around or 6 months worth or whatever, and they make it and you did or whatever, but your chances are so much lower if that's the case. You're taking so much more risk, and I get it because you're kind of like you got this passion and this vision, this idea, and you're like, we got to go, let's do it. But maybe, if you really sit back and take the bigger view, all right, and think of the long term. Are you trying to build a business to start tomorrow so that you can sell it, in 18 months, or are you trying to build something that's going to be here 20 years from now? And if that's the case, which is typically more often the case, especially for something like a restaurant or a coffee shop, then just hold on, wait, give yourself the best chance by taking an extra year or whatever, and because nobody's going to come. It's not like you're going to miss the opportunity. Like, oh well, if we didn't start it this year, the whole market was going to get flooded and we were there. Like, if you're going to build a good business, a good restaurant, a good coffee shop, it's going to be good now, or it's going to be good 2 years from now, whenever you start it, if you're doing it the right way. And that, I mean, wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's what, a lot of people think that they have to, grab the lightning. And I think in different industries that may be the case, like the tech world for sure, because it changes so quickly. I think those challenges are completely different. But for us, and that's what I was, I had to talk with my partner about that because there's bulletproof coffee. That fad was kind of, he's like, oh, shouldn't we serve bulletproof coffee? And then another guy, like, people are bottling their cold brew coffee. Shouldn't we bottle our cold brew? And for me, I'm like, well, all those things are fads. Good coffee, even during the recession, 6 years ago, the coffee industry didn't dip. So if we just provide a really good cup down here and do a solid job and don't chase the trends, because the trends will distract again. I think that's one thing, is having a clear focus and mission as to what you're going to do. Don't chase the wind. I think for us that's crucial, and sticking to that, because the temptation's there. You'll be like, oh, this guy is selling his bottled cold brew like crazy, but bottled cold brew nobody will be talking about it in a year probably, or it'll be such a small impact on your business that it's not worth all the energy and time you're putting into it. So I just say stay the course and kind of really know why you're doing what you're doing, and just do it well, and do it in the time that is best, not like right now, because out of a sense of urgency. I think that'll set you up to make poor decisions.
That's such good advice, man. If you're listening to this, just rewind that and listen again. I completely agree with everything Sean just said. Now, I do need to ask you something. Did I hear you mention bulletproof coffee?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's funny because, which is, folks, if you are not familiar with that, it's a coffee that a guy named Dave Asprey kind of came up with something called bulletproof coffee, which is you take your coffee and you put, and correct me where I'm wrong, Sean, but I used to make this sound like a tablespoon of unsalted grass-fed butter, and then a tablespoon of like MCT oil or coconut oil, and you blend it up into like this frothy thing that's got like a lot of, basically all that oil and butter is what he would say is really quality fat. So, but it's a kind of frothy, creamy drink with caffeine and fat that should fuel your morning or whatever. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
And were you guys doing that? Were y'all brewing bulletproof coffee?
No. I a few people had asked me, and but it was more because it turned into like this meal replacement weight loss deal.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was like, I'm not doing that. I just don't want to. I feel like that is a disservice to what we're doing, because first of all, I'm not going to profess anyone to skip a meal to replace it with oil and coffee. I just personally, like just eat whole foods and eat healthy and exercise and whatever. But I had it, and it some people love it, and it does provide a lot of energy because you are getting those good fats and the caffeine. But yeah, I mean it's just one of those things. I'm not going to change my menu for it, because down here at least that kind of passed, and no one's really talking about it right now. But a year ago,
it's already come and gone. Yeah. That's funny. So that's good, man. You know what you want and what your business is all about, and your core. And I think this is another piece of really, really good advice. It's just not following the fads and not getting caught up and letting shifting winds drive which decisions you might make that are important for the business. Because it's not just like, we're going to serve this. It's adding supplies. It's adding a process. It's training. It's costing it out. You have to blend it, so maybe you need more blender or whatever. Like, it's not just a thing you think, we could just do that. Like, you want that? Yeah, we've got the butter and the MCT oil right in the back here. Let's just blend one up. So I love that, man. Well, hey, Sean, listen, I know you're a busy guy, and we've talked for a while, and you've given a lot of really, really good and useful advice, and you have a cool story. So, hey, man, just thank you for doing this very much. I know anybody that's listening to this is going to get a ton out of it. So really appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Absolutely, man. It was fun to talk and share with you guys.
Cool, man. All right, well, listen, we'll let you get back to it. I'm sure 95% of the country would love to have the weather that you guys probably have now on March 13th, but we'll let you go enjoy that.
All right, brother.
All right, man. See you.
Talk to you soon.
All right, bye.